Attention, everyone, it's time for the rabbi to rap. Get down. Drop it by your tongue. Was that the kind of introduction you were hoping for?
Yeah, like that, they don't listen to me.
You know what, folks? I don't get paid enough for this. I just want to go ahead. Good morning, everyone. After setting the topic rap with the rabbi, I realized the implications of that. Leaving that aside, I want to make this an open forum, but I want to clarify at the outset that too often that can be an excuse for not preparing and dialing it in, as it were. And I do like open forums. I find and have found in classes that I've taken both formally and informally that it's usually the Q&A, the exchange, that's not only clarifying, but what I tend to look forward to. It's a little bit more real, it's a little bit more down to earth, potentially. All that said, when given the opportunity to have an open forum, I've always prepared something, not merely to fall back on, but perhaps to stimulate some conversation, not to guide, because no holds barred, really no holds barred. But I do want to open up, with your permission, a little section of rabbinic teaching that I think has a very powerful universal message, irrespective of whether one's a Christian or a Jew or whomever or whatever. Let me begin. And again, I don't want to make this a lecture in a frontal sense. I do want to entertain questions, struggle with ideas in an open forum. But let me begin by saying the Bible cries out for expansion, edification, clarification, explanation, and so on down the line. I think I've shared with you years and years ago as an upper division Bible class, Columbia University upper division graduate class in Bible. And the first day, the teacher, the professor, stands up and he holds open a Bible. And in a very open-ended manner, he asks, what does the Bible say? And here we think we're the next messiahs, and we're the luminaries, and we're the inseparable link to the future and all that highfalutin stuff. So we're going around the class and we're citing Wellhausen theory, and we're talking about literary structure, and he's just essentially stroking his chin. He puts his ear to the text, and effectively, and I believe he used an expletive, I don't hear a damn thing, or it might have been said, blank damn thing. He closes the book and he begins the lecture. It doesn't say a word. You got to get in there and read it. You got to get in there and interpret it. So from the Bible, the literary structure, the structure of the literature of Judaism, underneath the Bible is an expansive work, an encyclopedic work called the Talmud. Talmud means teaching. And what the Talmud does, but not in an exhaustive manner, is it will take a sentence, it will take a theme in the biblical narrative, and it will expand on it. But it does so in a debate, a forum setting. The Talmud, this enterprise, this encyclopedic enterprise, has over 1,000 different rabbinic figures offering debate, agreement, challenge, and so on. It was closed, sealed in the 7th century of the Common Era. And there's been subsequent commentaries, both of course on the Bible that sits above the Talmud itself, and later issues that naturally evolve over the course of centuries of human existence. The section that I have is one that focuses in on overreaching as it's cited in the Bible itself. The concept as derived in the Old Testament, in the Hebrew Bible, is that you can overreach, you can manipulate with words in the marketplace. And we know that. And there's a fine line from good salesmanship to manipulative salesmanship. And business is so important. Making a living, providing jobs is seen as one of the greatest things within the context, the broad brushstroke of Jewish thought that a human being can possibly endeavor in the physical world, providing jobs, building infrastructure. It's you folks who built this church. It just didn't happen. I don't mean to patronize, you know that. I attended recently, our daughter-in-law, we consider a daughter, her graduation. Jill, my wife Jill, and I flew back to Boston. And the graduation was lovely, and we loved it, and we enjoyed her parents, and it's just a big love fest. It was just so enjoyable. I wish it for all of you. And it's been a long time since I attended a graduation, my own included, the times where I've graduated, and my children, and I'm trying to think of friends that I don't recall. But what reminded me is that not one commencement speaker, not one, said to primarily young people's medical school graduation, not one said, all of you, and I mean all of you, are the beneficiaries of the generations that came before. Everything you learned during the 4 years of your medical school training, everything is a result of the toil of generations that came before you. But rather, you are the next stars, you're going to transform the world, all of which may be true. In the continuum of life, there's value to that. But the antecedent is not that you're wet behind the ears, not to club you over the head, but don't you dare forget you are the beneficiaries. Everything you learn came from people before you. And the PhD students, they get doctorates from studying people who never went to college. So don't think you're so, hoi polloi. And that's the issue here. Everything we learn comes from the generations before us. The things that are built, the ideas that are sparked in our minds, and that continuum of thought. And therein lies also what I think is the genius of Judaism, Christianity, Judeo-Christian thinking, is linear time. Linear time assumes, has as its foundation, that we can move from point X to point Y. We may zig and zag, we may undulate, we may regress, but the projection is that we can move forward, that we can unpack more deeply, that we can learn, we can grow, provided there's not this sense of arrogance and hubris. Yesterday in my synagogue, this is my church and my synagogue, and I spoke about the fascination that we continually have over the Titanic. There are two articles. I read the New York Times, the Washington Post, and the Wall Street Journal. And on Wednesday, there was a piece in the Washington Post that asked the question, why are we so fascinated about the Titanic? And then in yesterday's Wall Street Journal, a similar article appeared. And talk about hubris, to build a ship where we as a human enterprise think that we can control something that is so greater than the entirety of the human enterprise with the unsinkable Titanic and so on. And I talked about the immersible and so on, and from there dealt with a very interesting concept. There was a wonderful rabbi, theologian, Harold Schulweis, and he was actually a rabbi in Los Angeles, and he wrote, he was a philosopher as much as he was a theologian, and he coined the phrase predicate theology. You know what a predicate is? Essentially, it's a verb, right? And he reframed the question, not where is God, but when is God? And they're all important questions. Where is God? But when is God? And he would argue, using predicate grammar, and then hence predicate, his words, theology, God is when the world reacts to something. I thought it was just extraordinarily interesting and tragic that around the world there was interest in this submersible, the Titan. I mean, even the names themselves are so, look how great we are, the Titanic, the Titan, and so on. But when is God? God is when, after a tornado, human beings who just care about other human beings of whom they'll never know on any deep level, let alone ever know, care, roll up their sleeves and literally give blood or what have you. That is when is God, as opposed to where is God. And so, that was not as circuitous as I'm making it here, or so I think, a presentation that I had to my congregation. But the idea of we all benefit from, yes, contemporaries, but the generations that came before, provided we approach the future as well as the present without arrogance, without the sense of, look at me, the world revolves around me and I alone, as it were. All right, anyway, so that's the Talmud. The Talmud builds on, expands on the Bible. And as we look at the Bible, sometimes I would argue we lose sight that what is the Bible trying to teach? I think in its most simple, not simplistic, there's a world of difference between being simplistic and simple. Remember Einstein's great aphorism, the sign of true genius is to make something as simple as possible, but not more so. Simplistic thinking is cheap thinking. Simple thinking is clean thinking. In its most basic, simple expression, the Bible helps us to relate to God and God's dictate here on earth. And of course, it's open for discussion. My teacher in the first day of that Bible seminar, holding his ear to the Bible, saying, I don't hear a thing. You got to get in there and interpret it. And that's what the Talmud does, all in a hope, if you think of a pyramid, to go beyond the apex of the pyramid and to struggle with, and the operative is struggle with what it is that God wants from us. The word Israel means struggle with God. Not that it should be an adversarial relationship, but we're dealing, within our own human limitations, an infinite concept of which, here again, a high measure of humility to approach what it is that God wants of us. The Talmud helps, it's not definitive, helps expand and explain. So I want to share with you a section of Talmud and then open up. Seriously, again, it's a rap with the rabbi. I don't even like rap, okay? I find it racist, misogynistic, mean-spirited, and whatever. All right, that's for another time. This is a section of Talmud, actual Talmud, that focuses around, as I alluded to, a word overreaching, based on a verse in the Bible itself. So here, just as there is overreaching in buying and selling, being manipulative, the phrase, don't put a stumbling block in front of a blind person, doesn't mean if you see someone walking, perhaps with a white red tip cane, that you're a sadistic monster and you put a brick in front of that person, and then somehow it's humorous to watch him or her fall, right? Doesn't mean that. It means that you don't take advantage of someone who might be blind to information. I'm selling a car, and I know that the transmission is a little faulty and maybe leaks on occasion. But before you come and test drive the car, I fill the transmission fluid. All right, you drive it, seems perfectly fine. You are blind to something that I know. I'm putting a stumbling block in front of a blind person. Rabbinic law is that it's never buyer beware. It's seller must divulge, divulge. Yes, the seller must do that. You don't put a stumbling block in front of a blind person. Metaphorically, that person is blind, is unaware of something that you're aware of, and you must tell him or her. All right, so just as there is overreaching in buying and selling, this is the Talmud, so too is there overreaching in speech. Words are actions. Your Bible, your Christian Bible begins the word, right? Or reference to the word. Words are transformative. We know that. You can read a book and it's just an inert, piece of ink and paper, but it can get your blood pressure, accelerated or can put you in a certain mood. And it's a word, it's a written word, but words are likened to actions. So just as there is overreaching in buying and selling, so too is there overreaching in words. And the Hebrew is actually quite interesting here. Kashem she'ona'ah b'mekach u'mimkar, kach ona'ah b'devarim. Thus, there is overreaching in words, how you use your words, how we use our words. Then it goes on, and this is something that perhaps we've experienced at both ends, a purchaser and a seller. And we all have customers, whether we call them congregants or passengers or patients or clients. We all have customers in the marketplace of life. It's important. It's very real for all of us. And one need not be a corporate CEO to act ethically in business. It's on the day-to-day, how we stand in line waiting for checkout or what have you, and so on. One may not say to a merchant, how much is this object if one does not wish to buy it? Why is that overreaching in words? What's the implication? Not more than the implication. What's the directive here? You ever, what? Well, no, you can negotiate. There's, that's fine. You're buying a house and the house is, well, let's see, we're in LA. All right, $6 million. Would you take $5.5 million, right? What does it do? What does it do to the merchant? It raises his or her expectations, right? And what about, have you heard, I learned this some time ago, that Best Buy is the showcase for Amazon? Yeah. You go into Best Buy and, you're looking for a camera. You're stealing their time, or you're stealing the time structure of, employee management, right? We really need you to unstock, to stock those boxes. And here you're talking to a customer who's just has no intention whatsoever of buying. For a number of years, it's a very funny story. So I have a childhood friend. We met in third grade, and we're so similar in many ways and could not be more different. Anyway, he lives primarily in Michigan, though he has a home in Los Angeles, and he's a very successful businessman. And he loves cars and he collects cars, and he doesn't make his living buying and selling cars, but he has a dealer's license. And again, he doesn't do that, but he can buy cars he knows what a holdback is. Yeah, some of which you can get at Costco and other things, but anyway, for years he would buy our cars. And he would say, he'd call me and say, Michael, this is a good time to buy this car, just buy it. And I would say, of course, and we would do it. Obviously, we were in the market for a car. But I could never, based on wanting to strive to be a religious man, it doesn't mean Orthodox, a religious person, I could never go to a dealership and test drive a car knowing full well that I'm going to be getting it through my friend who would broker a deal somewhere else. I couldn't do that. I'm not looking for you to see me as some paragon of virtue. That's not the point. But if you start thinking in those terms, and that's based on the Talmud's expansion of a sentence in the Bible. And then it goes on. So you don't ask the price of an object if you have no intention of buying. Of course, you can go into a store and a gregarious salesperson will come up to you. And, I'm a big sucker. If the salesperson is really nice and informative, I have no intention of buying whatever it is, but I usually end up walking out with whatever it is, within boundaries, right? To me, that matters a lot. And anyway, and then listen to this. If someone was a repentant sinner, one may not say to that person, remember your earlier deeds. One of the things that I sit with couples who are preparing for their wedding is I ask, do you fight fairly? And they will often say, well, what do you mean? And I say, well, do you keep dredging up things that presumably you've resolved? You always do that. And you always remind me that I always do that. If it's unresolved, that the potential is one thing. What about, we talk about forgiveness. Here is really an intertwining of Judeo-Christian ethics, forgiveness. Do we really have the capacity to forgive? We want to be forgiven. I struggle with that, I'll be honest with you. As the Jewish high holidays approach, where it's not one day of forgiveness, it's a misnomer, but forgiveness, the notion of taking stock of one's life, is the forefront of the day of Yom Kippur. I often question, do I have the capacity really to not forget, but to forgive? And not club someone about it, or, the recesses of my mind, I'm not really trusting of this person because of. And I'm not suggesting that there aren't things that really can break relationships and break trust. Yeah.
How do you balance that? We don't forget, but we can forgive. If we don't forget, then it's still there.
Well, let me sidestep that. One of the things I worry about is losing my memory. And if I lose my memory, I lose my life. It's dramatic, but there's some truth to that. I think it's very important to remember in that our past is largely, and as cliche as it sounds, makes us who we are. But if I can think about a past event that hurt me or I was hurt by, and acknowledge that the person to whom this hurt is directed is also remorseful and truly repentant, then that helps me. But I don't think it's healthy to forget it. And I think it might be unrealistic to even put that as a goal. If I said, don't think about an elephant, don't think about an elephant, right? How can you not think about an elephant? But it's a balance. Yeah, it is. If you remember it so as to, if it constantly, brings you back to a very low and dark time, then there really isn't forgiveness there. I've often said the opposite of love is not hate. It's not. If you hate someone, if you react to someone, you're connected to that person. The opposite of love is indifference.
Yes.
Once you're over it, you're over it. It doesn't raise your blood pressure. It doesn't, spark a reaction. And I don't know if it's all or nothing either. We're not machines. Yes, sir.
Well, I was just gonna ask if the Talmud has anything in response to Sally's question to say that both the potency and the cost of forgiveness is diminished if we have forgotten whatever it was that prompted the forgiveness.
It's excellent. And no, I say no, given what is not a complete and exhaustive understanding of the Talmud, but from what I have been taught and what I am aware of, no. And that would be powerful. You do have texts that will address those issues, both, of course, secular, but within a religious setting as well. How do we forgive, or what's the value of maintaining the memory of the act without holding the person any longer accountable, as it were. But that's a serious question, right? So the first example of taking advantage of someone with words is a merchant, which is a very day-to-day thing, especially someone who works on commission. But leaving all that aside, how much is the cost of the object if you have absolutely no intention whatsoever of purchasing it? And then if someone's a repentant sinner, you may not say to that person, remember the earlier deeds. And then how about if someone converts? How about someone becomes a Christian after a life that was less than enviable, or a Jew, or a non-Jew to a Jew, or a non-Christian to a Christian? And this is what here the Talmud says: if someone, if the person is the son or daughter of converts, one may not say to that person, remember the deeds of your forefathers, for it is said, you shall not wrong a stranger, nor shall you oppress that person. This is a beautiful little piece of Talmud, and it's not unique. I want to just conclude, and then we will open it up with one other example here. And the discussion continues, and they'll talk about, well, is that in fact, the Hebrew word is ona'ah, and they'll say, well, does the word ona'ah apply only to weights and measures, in other words, the financial concerns, or is it limited only to verbal abuse, verbal overreaching, and so on? But this, I think, is also particularly interesting and certainly worthy of discussion and crosses theological boundaries. If suffering, you'll excuse the English here, but if suffering befell someone, or if illness befell him, or if he was bearing his sons, and you can use female as well, one should not say to him in the way that Job's friends said to Job. Have you guys looked at the book of Job at all? Have you studied it and so on? It's a difficult book. Structurally, it's difficult, aside from what's obvious, the content, the material. Anyway, you might remember in the book of Job, so if someone's suffering from illness or someone's bearing a loved one should not say to that person in the way that Job's friends said to Job, is not your fear of God, your confidence, your hope, and the uprightness of your ways? Remember, I pray you, whoever perished being innocent. What's that? Do you remember the section where Job's friends try to comfort him? The expression with friends like that, who needs enemies, right? And what was one of they each had different explanations as to why Job was suffering. But what was the inference of at least one friend, and maybe the most, in my estimation, among the most damaging comments? And time and situation is very important here. Do you remember Job, you must have done what? You must have done something to bring this on to you.
Your fault.
It's your
Yeah.
fault.
That's the worst.
It's
cruel.
It is cruel, certainly at that time. And that's not to say that there aren't things that we do to ourselves. Okay, but timing is important. I'll never forget, still close with a man whose son was a saint. He died at 42 of esophageal cancer. He was a good man. I can say that on a personal level, just having the privilege of interacting with him over an arc of time. And the father, he and I, subsequent to his son's death, would go out to lunch, have a cup of coffee, what have you. And he's a retired radiologist. And I would say, now this is later, okay, much later. In fact, a year or more, a couple years later, after his son died, and we would talk about theology. And I would say to him, you know, you have viewed films of the most horrific illnesses during the course of your career. And theologically, that didn't disrupt you. But when it crosses the precipice of your door, now all of a sudden, you know, you're, of course, and with sensitivity, and I don't want to say or come across as if I'm above this, but you know, honesty in theology is very important. Timing, situation, how one reads the situation isn't perhaps an art form and not a science. But you get the inference. So you've read all these films of horrendous diagnoses, and you know your faith quotient was unshakable. Once it crossed the precipice of your home, now all of a sudden, you know, God's a huckster, and life is meaningless, and so on. And it needs to be, you know, dissected, if you will, on a host of different levels. The loss of a child, and you know, nothing but sympathy, and ideally words of comfort. So my point being is that, you know, theologically, we need to challenge ourselves. Not that we are guilty per se, but we might be inconsistent in the way that we construct our own theology. You know, is God just in our back pocket or our purse? Is God a fair weather friend? Is there things that we never realize that we ought to challenge our own way of looking at God and religion? Not to deconstruct it, but to at least be a more sophisticated consumer of religion, irrespective of whether your religion starts with a C or a J. That's a fair question. And I think it's a question that you know, again, we need to raise. Jews have often said, well, I can't believe in God that allowed 6 million innocent people to die. And you know, I'm a post-Holocaust Jew, and too much, I think, Jews' identity is anti-Semitism, which drives me crazy. Anti-Semites can soak themselves. It's not going to stop me from loving God and wanting to pursue good religious values. But think about the basic calculus. So I can't believe in God because 6 million innocent lives were murdered, taken without divine intervention, or at least from my construct, divine intervention. So I unpack and I say, number one, isn't that an expression of human free will? Can't you take a hammer and build a beautiful holy institution such as Brentwood Presbyterian Church as easily as you can take a hammer and build a crematoria? Don't we have free will? Are we nothing more than marionettes on a string? And on the other hand, no one dies 6 million times. So if an innocent individual is murdered, why theologically is that any less troubling than 6 million? No one dies 6 million times. But these are hard questions. And by the way, I would argue, as religious consumers, we're not asking those hard questions, and religion is seen as a soft target among our highly educated children. And they don't give a damn about the next generation. Not that we are guilty, not that religion is one size that fits all any more than everyone's going to love classical music as opposed to rap. Okay, back on subject here. But we keep throwing softballs. So my Ivy League and your Ivy League children look at you and look at me and think we're some kind of fossil in time. You know as well as I do that the great academic institutions revolved around their divinity schools. No longer is that the case. I mentioned Columbia. Columbia has a chapel on its campus. I don't know what the hell goes on in there, but nothing. So why aren't, it is heartbreaking, but you know, okay, I'll get this off my chest. Shame on us, all right? I mean, in the sense that we bear some of that blame, but here, overreaching with words. Now that raises, and that's the beauty of Talmud, because it's this Socratic, long before Socrates, you know, this Socratic methodology of questioning, of breaking down, of building up. And that's what we need to do. All right, I wanted to share that. As I said, in a Q&A, I always try to prepare something, not to guide the conversation, though it may, but I just don't want to phone it in, not in front of you folks.
Yes, I have a curiosity. I think long before politics invented left and right, there was already clearly for hundreds if not thousands of years, the issue of ethical manifestation of your faith in your day-to-day behavior. Talmud was wonderful at that. And I suppose that on one side of the spectrum, Christianity might look at Rabbinical Judaism and say, you guys went too far, too legalistic. But I suppose that on the other side, when we look at Christianity, you would say, you guys took spiritualization of ethics way too far. This is about here and now, and you're not doing any of that here and now. And it would be a valid criticism of Christianity in general, I think, to say that. But my curiosity is, when rabbis get together and look over the fence at what Christians are saying and doing, is this a topic of discussion? Do you say, gee, you know, those guys, they should practice what they preach a little bit?
Listen, I've always been honest with you folks, and I don't say things differently. I may use different language, but I no different ideas expressed here that I would express to my own congregants. So the answer directly to that question is no. If anything, when we get together, we'll often ask, how can we learn from our co-religionists? Seriously, and this is not a sugar-coated answer. It's a very honest answer. And I think it is very important for us to look within our own tradition, and for that matter, to compare and contrast with others. I like value-laden value judgments, provided it doesn't become ad hominem, right? There's a reason why I want to be a Jew. I've always said, I've said it in front of you guys, but for Judaism, there's no question in my mind I'd be a Christian. No question. I love Christianity. And I'm not saying that to win favor here. It's true. I say that to my congregants. Love it. I have also shared, and I actually believe with conviction, Jesus, who was an informed, serious Jew, I would argue, as I have stated, I think the Jewish establishment drove him nuts, drove him crazy, precisely for what you're talking about. So obsessive compulsive. And here's where I do feel, though, there are core theological differences, which I celebrate. It's not, let me inform you, let me show you the way. That's not my agenda. It's so help me, it is not. But again, in direct answer to your question, no. Folks, we're all circling the drain. And I
Well, thanks for cheering us up.
I figure this may be the last Sunday morning and I'll stand before you, but what the hell, I'll go down swinging. Churches and synagogues are shuttering every week. Or they're merging, and who knows what limited shelf life that will bear. I don't know. And I'm not saying that we're dying out, but we're all groping as to what can we do and how can we look within as well as, on the horizon to stem certain trends and so on. I think it is important to articulate some of the differences. Look, I think law is very important. And I know within the antecedent of Christianity, there was serious debate, James and Paul, with regard to the role of law. I do not hold as a Jew, and as well as my own personal aesthetic, I don't believe human beings are basically good. That's not to say we're evil. I think we need to be taught. Children of whom I adore, my grandkids, the statement, if we could only just skip to grandkids and, jump over kids, I identify with that, right? I've shared with you, I have 3 delinquents. Actually, I have 5 delinquents now. I consider our son-in-law son and her daughter-in-law daughter. But her grandkids, they're perfect, right? You guys can relate. Children are beautiful. But they need to be taught. Golding's Lord of the Flies resonates. It just does. We need to be taught. We need a structure. And I actually believe in, and this is a faith comment. This is a distillate of life. I believe in the value of ultimate justice. That means in a court, not of human beings, ultimately in the court of God. But I don't subscribe to the idea that God is a punitive God. I hear Christianity emphasizes the love of God. You have that in Judaism, but it's squelched out of the legalisms and so on. I think the institution of keeping kosher is unbelievably humane and magnificent. But it is killed in details that, in my estimation, and I know enough to say this, are disgusting. So all of a sudden, we're focused in on the details as opposed to really the power of what it is there to establish. How an animal's treated, how it's slaughtered. I wish I would favor it. My belt or my shoes would come with a tag that said the animal from which this hide is derived was treated humanely and killed humanely. I'm all in favor. I'm basically a vegetarian. All right, I eat chicken on occasion, and I eat fish. All right. Again, I'm not setting myself up, be like me, or I'm a paragon or whatever. So I say that, and I'm absolutely in favor of animals as a food source. All right. So this is not holier than thou. But we lose sight of that, and within the Jewish community, there are now methodologies to slaughter heavy animals by stunning them before they're actually killed. That is proven to be more humane. Who's the autistic woman who Temple Brandon? Yeah, I mean, she's done really just extraordinary work on how animals perceive stress and so on. That to me is a religious issue. Not to do away with it, but how can we reform it? How can we make it even not onerous, but more humane? And that goes for farm workers too. And that's Jewish law, and that drives me nuts. And then you have Larry David, who's a comedic giant, or Woody Allen, a comedic giant, that so trivialized religion, it makes me want to vomit. All right, I don't go to Hollywood to, get a lesson in theology, but that's the caricature. And they're comedic giant, they're brilliant. Okay. And within Christianity, I don't subscribe to the idea that human beings are born with some type of theological taint. But I do believe that our proclivities or inclinations are not towards evil in that sense, but need to be reined in. A child needs to be taught. We need to be taught.
We need help mastering our natures.
Either mastering our nature or curbing or channeling our nature without squelching it. Without squelching it. Are we on time? Am I exhausting my time? So no, I must say, certainly my inner circle of colleagues / friends, I think there is, and I am not patronizing you folks, not now or at any time. I think there's so much to learn from the church. I think that aspect of love of God, and the immediacy of God is something that Jews are much too intellectual. If they're anything, they're deists.
Can you entertain one more question here from Ms. Sally Vasmal?
To the issue of looking inside your own beliefs and how you live them out. Chris Christie challenged a number of Christians in their support of a man who has been indicted, who's been a cheat, a liar, a thief, and all of the above, and asking them, how does that align with your stated Christian beliefs?
Are you speaking about?
It's a hypothetical person.
Here's where I must tell you, I will speak politically, but I'll never speak partisan, whether you folks are Republicans or Democrats. I will say this, as a general rule, I'm not a utopian thinker. I'm really not. I wrote a piece that actually was published, how I don't pray for a Messiah. I think a Messiah, the notion of Messiah, though there are times, to be totally honest, where my back, not metaphorically, literally is up against a wall, and I'm scared and deeply concerned, whether for myself or others, that I pray for divine intervention. But I think it's a theological cop-out from the standpoint that what would a Messiah say if he or she were to walk in this door that you and I haven't been told before? Don't cheat, don't manipulate, strive not to be perfect, but strive to continually improve. So I'm not a utopian. And I can tell you what I would tell others when it comes to, putting a box checking a box on a ballot. Personality is important, but what is the platform? And I'm not trying to cop out. There may be things. I haven't met a perfect politician. I haven't met a perfect human being. And I really think we are, and I'm not being dismissive, we are such a mixed bag, all of us. What are the things that I can overlook? And since it's a personal question, I tend to be very libertarian with regard to adults' personal behavior. It's not my business. Now I realize a politician is public, and are there policies that I think are vital? And leave aside Donald Trump, okay? But just are there policies that are so central? And usually it's not one policy that would, to me, give more of a panorama if I would care to vote for a given candidate over another candidate. Again, all under the proviso that I personally am not I don't subscribe to perfection and a utopian world. Come right back to you. Yeah, please.
Well, I want to say that I really was attracted to this format when I saw the publicity about it before. And I thought it's been a very rewarding session. I think it would be useful for the next time we're wrapping with Rabbi, that attendees be encouraged to submit electronically questions or issues that we thought it would be useful for you to hear.
Be totally open for it.
Yeah,
Yeah,
because
yeah.
I think, for example, Sally's question was on that point, and I think Jody's question as well, and
Yeah.
it would also help, because I definitely get wanting to come with something prepared. I
Yeah.
thought your opening remarks were very valuable. But if you have the questions in advance, you wouldn't have that
Well taken.
anxiety about.
Well taken. And I would only stipulate that if we do have another rap with the rabbi, it's WRA. Other comments, questions? Yes, yeah.
In your comment about the death of one person, kind of comparing it to the death of 6 million people, that I'm kind of struggling with the way you presented that.
Life is very phallic, and I know that's a crude comment, but it is. Again, no one dies 6 million times. You can't. You die once. So if you're talking about the moral issue here and you want to focus in on it, if an innocent human being, an innocent individual is murdered, tortured, abused, theologically, that raises the same challenge with regard to God's intervention with one person as opposed to 10 or 10,000 or 10 million.
Oh, you're talking about God's intervention.
Yeah, yes, of course.
Okay.
You know, we are drawn to numbers. It's odd. I mentioned this yesterday. Again, I sound like somehow I'm above this. I'm not. But God forbid I see an accident on the road. I purposely try to look away. What is it going to teach me, number one? And number two, I try to say a prayer. You know, may the ambulance help the people. May the people survive. I hear a siren. I don't go, nuts. You know, there's going to be traffic ahead. You know, may the police get the bad guy. You know, and not get hurt in the process. It's what do we learn? You know. Anyway, I'm digressing here. Other comments, other questions. Issue with the notion of Jesus dying for our sins. That is something that as a Jew, I have a theological issue. That's a division. But you know what the real historic division was that I think ultimately created the schism between Judaism and Christianity? It wasn't whether Jesus was the Messiah. It was whether he was divine. That was the break point theologically. Nazarenes were Christians. Sectarianism was really the political scenery in the 1st and 2nd century in what was Palestine. Remember, the word Palestine comes from the Philistines. Remember sharing that with you. And that was a name given to Israel after the Romans conquered it in the 1st century, long before Islam. Just came back from Morocco, a trip to Morocco, still a little jet lagged. And Jews lived in Morocco for centuries before Muslims came into Morocco. Centuries. Comment, question, yes, please.
This is just to affirm what you said early on
Bless you.
about attending a college graduation, and at no time was there any reference or thanks given to the generations before. I attended, 2 of my grandsons graduated college, one in May, one in June, and both groups got the same message. You're terrific. You've got the world in front of you. Go grab it and be wonderful. Nothing about all of what preceded them.
Yeah. All right, you're gonna here. One of my favorite films is Rodney Dangerfield's Back to School. All right, I want to kind of apologize for that one, but there was a scene where Rodney Dangerfield, who's is a good-hearted man, but rather rather rough around the edges, he's talking to either the dean or the president. And he says, it's guys like me who built, these halls of learning, right? Anyway, just reminded me of that. Comment, question. Was there here? Yeah, no? Other comments, other questions? Yes.
I recently remembered with the church, became a member again of this church. It was 14 years ago, and it's the funniest thing that I'm still the youngest member in the room. Just very, very funny. It's like, wow. I just want to share some creative thoughts with you. I'm looking at how to create something here within the church that can reach out to non-customers of the church, and also to people who are disenfranchised from the church, as they say in Catholicism, recovering Catholics. But there's recovering Lutherans, there's a lot of big segment that's recovering. And it seems like the history of our church, and the history of Judaism probably as well, is punctuated by a bunch of councils, right? These councils, these conciliar movements of trying to figure out how all of this works. And it seems like, for me at least, very creative, kind of radical thinking. But you need that to reach out into this modern world, is to look at the Judeo-Christian Testament not as two separate things, but to see it as one testament. In our faith, we always talk about First Testament, Second Testament, New and Old, to combine that together, but not to call that the First Testament. It'd be the second. And what that means is that the newest testament, the First Testament, is science. It's creation. But it's science and creation before language, before people organized through language around looking at what that is. And so as I'm looking at that, there might be a possibility of reaching out to a much broader group of people in a more scientific kind of an age, using that and recognizing that as a First Testament. So that's my thinking. The question, I guess, would be is, where do you see science in all this? The other thing is that when you say that, what you're going to do is you're going to go down in a really weird path. You're going to say that the scriptures are more, I hate to say it, mythological. They're to be taken literally and also figuratively. That's a really great thing to reach out into the modern person and to say they're kind of both, but it creates all kinds of different things. So I'm wondering where science fits in your perspective, and any comment.
The decline of religion has occurred over decades. It's not a new trend. Science is immeasurably valuable, but as religious advocates, I think we're losing sight in the same way that Judaism can get mired in law, and you lose the thrust of what ultimately the law is there to either enhance or to make accessible. I think some key and foundational questions are being lost within mainstream religious life, Judeo-Christian. Science entertains the hows of life, how something works, how something can be transformed. Religion is more foundational in that regard, and I'm not saying in a triumphal way. Both are necessary. We're more than physical creatures. We're more than just DNA and chemical reactions. Religion asks the question why, and we're not asking that question. We're not asking it on an organizational level. Why does this matter? Why is it important to posit, and the operative word is posit, the notion of God? I'm glad, intellectually, I'm satisfied that we don't know for certain God exists. If we knew, it would drive us nuts. I've shared that with you. I am intellectually satisfied that I don't know for certain, none of us knows for certain, that there's something beyond our existence here on earth. It would drive us crazy. If I knew this was all there was to my existence and I'm just a blip of an infinite cold universe, That would be maddening. I'd be a pure existentialist. Me, and that's it. And if I knew for certain there was something beyond our existence here on Earth, when things get tough, I'd hit the reset button and I'd just, be transformed into an existence outside of this one here on Earth. I'm oversimplifying, I realize. I think science has become a false god. And I worry about when we talk about idolatry, it's not worshiping physical things. Can be, but ultimately I think it's worshiping ideas, thinking that that's the sine qua non. And we're all the beneficiary of science. And scientific methodology, I am afraid, is being driven in a different direction, where there really is deep-throated, spirited debate and not doctrine. There's orthodoxy, the same way religious orthodoxy in science. And science is a gift, it's a blessing. And science can challenge conventional understanding such that, yes, I do think there's myth in religion. Mythology, myth in religion. So I concur with that. But still in all, are we asking the question why? Why does God matter? Don't tell me whether God exists or not. I don't know. We're not fools. We know we don't know. Tell me why it's important to at least struggle with the construct that there is potentially and ideally something higher than all of us, that morality is not solely relative. You think this, I think that. It's cultural divisions, it might be geographical differences, it might be upbringing, environment. That in a theoretical construct, that morality is not something that is reduced solely to choosing your favorite flavor of ice cream. I like Rocky Road, you like strawberry. These are questions that we're not entertaining. How about meaning in life? How about the power of community? How about a message that, yes, does evolve, because we need to put our ear to the Bible and realize we don't hear anything, but we got to get in there and interpret it. Now, will there be ways that we interpret it that will fit our own narrative? What is tendentious thinking? I approach the text with a supposition, and then I try to draw out from the text support, whether it's sexual mores, whether it's economic paradigms, whether it's a view on God, whether it's certain behavioral issues, no question about that. We live in an unredeemed world. We do. But science, of course, is part of it. And by the way, that's not new. It's not new. The medievalists entertain Aristotelian thinking. At the base of science is philosophy, philosophical discourse. It's what a PhD was. It's not new. And still in all, after it's all said and done, how do we reach out? We love it ourselves. I don't have a better answer for you. I struggle with the idea that I feel our community, and I don't think we're much different than any other mainstream religious community, ought to have a bifurcated approach. Retirees on the one hand, because it's retirees who build and support and attend church and synagogue services, and perhaps grandchildren on the other. I'm serious. No, they're more malleable and they love their grandparents. And you know what? That's a precious window. And I also feel tied into that is never, and I mean never to talk down. Obviously, not a child. I want to protect a child's innocence. But to address the hard-hitting issues that our traditions have always done. And if all I get is a variation of what I read in the New York Times or the Wall Street Journal, I don't need to come to church or synagogue. Isn't that the role of religion, from the Latin religio, to make connections? Think of ligament, religio. You can hear the alliterative similarity here. And let's be honest, if you've ever worked with a physical therapist or a trainer, they'll often ask more from us than our religion typically does. And that's a problem. We're really out of time here, folks. Let me, you know what, let's hold that. One quick question, go ahead, it may not be quick.
It
but-
wasn't a question, it was a response to the earlier suggestion. No one wants to get more butts and pews than I do, but I am concerned. And I don't know if this is a phenomenon for the Jewish faith, but it's definitely a problem for mainline Protestant congregations. And that is the temptation to dilute what it means to be a Christian.
Yes, excellent.
In order to bring more people across the threshold. I imagine that's a similar challenge for
Jews.
Jewish
Yeah,
religion.
absolutely, absolutely. But listen, I'll put it in crude terms, not to diminish your comment, because I could not agree more fervently. I have a dear friend who said, you want to bring people into synagogue? Why don't we introduce pole dancing? It's another way of saying, you know, if we're going to dilute what it is that we represent, then what are we doing, right? What are we doing? All right, folks, better I walk out on you than you walk out on me.